institutions for scientific research. On display was the work of Indian startups in new and emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, robotics and nanotechnology. Have a look.
After the successful completion of the first meeting of the finance track under India's G20 presidency, G20 delegates got a chance to catch a glimpse of the startup ecosystem incubated at IISc Bengaluru. Secretary Department of Economic Affairs Ajay Seth and Chief Economic Advisor V. Ananth Nageshwaran were also seen taking keen interest in the semiconductor and nanotechnology startup ecosystem on the occasion.
We were essentially giving them a glimpse of what the institute is all about in advanced science and education in the country. We have created many institutes in the country, and we hope that we have conveyed what IISc stands for. And we also took this occasion to sort of show them the finest labs that we have in the institute, that is Nanotechnology Center in the institute, and also showcase the Bangalore startup ecosystem, which arguably perhaps the best ecosystem for startups in the world.
Financial arm of G20 visited us today so that they could get a glimpse about startups in the area of deep tech, including HAL, biotech, medtech, artificial intelligence, robotics, semiconductors, which India is embarking on in a big way. And they got to see areas in which India is coming up, how they could possibly potentially finance such that it could help their countries back there, and how it could possibly also result in products that could be helpful to them in the long run.
The G20 delegation members were impressed with the show and are of the view that some of the solutions can be replicated in their respective countries.
Absolutely. I was taking a look at the unmanned aircrafts to deliver packages in difficult regions, and I think in places like Mexico, where geography is a bit complicated, that could have a really large impact. I see that as a very useful technology.
Startups showcased at IISc range from space and geospatial technology to aircraft manufacturing and robotics. Many expressed the hope that the visit of G20 delegates will help them go international.
We are showcasing mobile robot telepresence, that is a unique technological vehicle which allows you to have live walking experience of another location. Not only that, it also allows you to move your neck around, it allows you to see what is going on so that you can participate, have real immersive participatory experience of that other place. It's huge. It is going to surpass 600 billion in the next 5 years.
Gati Robotics has a mandate to make robotic components. These are the core building blocks that go into making robots. So think of it as if you have a Lego block, you can make an entire building. Now most people right now, they integrate these blocks and make their robotic systems.
If the G20 is to help accelerate progress towards SDGs, focus must be on rejuvenating legacy data sets and using artificial intelligence and big data analytics, including drones and geospatial mapping, to generate futuristic new data sets. And India has much to offer the world on both these fronts. Ajay Mishra's report from Bengaluru for DD India.
In an exclusive conversation with DD India's correspondent Ajay Mishra, founder member of Infosys, TV Mohandas Pai hailed India as a global leader in the digital space and projected it to be the fastest growing digital economy in the near future. For startups, he proposed a $10 billion fund of funds in G20, calling for G20 to work towards ensuring adequate capital, which he said is lacking currently. Listen in.
We have very special guest here in Bangalore, Mr. TV Mohandas Pai, who is a Padma awardee and a renowned professional in the field of HR, in the field of IT and whatnot. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking to us. First of all, we have just concluded the Sherpa track, first Sherpa track and the finance track meeting, where the data and technology, the technological transformation is one of the core agendas of G20 presidency. How do you look at the agenda which has been set by the India to start with?
In the last 15 years, the digital revolution has started, and India is a global leader. And in the digital area, what India has done today, no country in human history has been able to do. and it has been driven by technology and data under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. On August 15, 2015, our Prime Minister stood up in Red Fort and said, Digital India, Stand Up India, Start Up India. I don't think many people understood what he meant. But today, look at what has happened. We have the India stack, Aadhaar 1.3 billion people, UPI 7.3 billion transactions, $150 billion of money being transferred every single month. And then we have the ONDC, and then we have the eKYC, we have the personal data locker, and then we have the account aggregator, and then we have other things like threats for financial inclusion. And using this technology, 475 million bank accounts have been opened.
But sir, that's what is the real problem is. The data is being governed, being controlled by the big tech in the USA, where the Google and the Meta and the companies are actually having a hold on the data.
The world decides whom does the data belong to. One, the data should belong to you and me because of personal data. Second, if somebody wants to use it, it has to be used by a permission. We need the data architecture called for permission, and it's called the data consent architecture. India has done that. And the third, the data has to reside in your country so that in case of misuse, your government protects you. Now I have so many malcontents in Delhi who say that, oh, data can be anywhere else. In the United States, if my data resides there, I'm a non-resident alien. I'm not a citizen. They're not going to protect me. The data will be available to the NSA. Today, the US has the largest cloud architecture in the world, the largest quantum of data of all the people in the world, and the national security of the United States has free access to it. So they're not going to protect us. So it has to be here, and our government is protect us, and they say it will be misused. It cannot be misused because we have the courts. The courts will protect us. So this is a canard that's being spent. So we must have it here, and you must do it.
Now we'll talk about the startup ecosystem, because you have preempted my questions, sir. We are third largest ecosystem in terms of startups. We started with 160 startup. Now we are 84,000 plus. Every week we are creating a unicorn. Where do you see this startup ecosystem going forward? Because a delegation is right now in in Bangalore to actually feel it on the ground.
Well, we'll have about 200,000 startups by 2025 December. We probably will have 250 unicorns. We'll create maybe $1.5 trillion of value, and that's going to grow. We'll have about 35 lakh employees by then. We already have about maybe 18 lakh employees in the startup ecosystem, and I think it's going to explode. But what it has done is to transform the views of our young people. We're creating a new generation of young entrepreneurs who are growing up in the digital world and interacting with young people in the metaverse. You see, today, you and I possibly are people of the analog world going into digital. The next generation is the digital generation. The generation after them, who are 13 to 15 today, are the metaverse generation. And the metaverse is coming with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and with machine learning coming, and with the genomics coming, and robotics, humanoids coming, and all space technologies and unmanned vehicles. We're going to see an upsurge of innovation, and India is poised there.
Mr. Pai, it was wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much for your time. I think it's a time for India, as you have said. And 2047, our aim, our mission for being a developed nation is not too far. That's all in this exclusive conversation. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.
The India correspondent Ajay Mishra also spoke with heads of foreign delegations participating in finance track meetings in Bengaluru on expectations from India's G20 presidency and their impressions of India's vibrant cultural diversity. Let's listen in to talking heads from France and UAE.
The experience so far is very good. We had a very productive two-day meeting. The warmth of the welcome here in Bengaluru was absolutely great. We enjoyed very I think intensive work sessions, but we also attended cultural events, and so we see that there is a full mobilization of all the authorities in India to make this G20 a success.
India is strategically really an important player in the G20, both by its size. It's a democracy, it has an enormous amount of intellectual and policy talent, and in that sense I think that we're very excited about India's chairing of the G20 and its leadership. We come because the G20 is an important institution. It's where important decisions are made for some of the most important players in the world. I think what will attract me here is both the combination of the fact that India will set the bar high on the quality of discussion and conversations, and the fantastic country and the diversity of the country and the warm reception we get from everyone, feeling at home instantly. And I think that's, you arrive here and you feel you're at home instantly.
So the delegates say they are feeling at home, but what do Indian startups and incubators feel about the visits of these delegates to IISc, the Indian Institute of Science in Bengaluru? Let's get a perspective on that from Umakant Soni. He is CEO, Art Park. It is an artificial intelligence and robotics technology park. It is an incubator supported by the Indian Institute of Science. Such a pleasure to have you, Mr. Soni, on this special broadcast, India at G20. You got to interact with some of the G20 delegates. How were those interactions like? And were they keen on replicating some of the solutions exhibited by, say, your incubator on AI and robotics, particularly in their countries?
Fantastic, great to be here. One of the key, myself, Umakant Soni, and I'm the CEO of Art Park. Art Park stands for AI and Robotics Technology Park, and we showcase some of the startups that are actually working on the cutting edge of AI and robotics. And it's a huge revolution. We're going to create $15.7 trillion of new economic value in the next 10 to 15 years, and 90% of that value is going to be in the digital physical realm. The dawn of hybrid in that sense. And it was fantastic to actually interact with the G20 delegates, because they are looking at the usage of this. And when we look at the broad spectrum of usage, and I'm not just talking about the developed world, but I'm also talking about the developing world. And it was very interesting to hear how we've been actually creating these cargo drones, which can take 250 to 300 kg of payload, and it can go up to 500 kilometers range, and how that might transform, let's say, the economy in Mexico or in Argentina, or maybe in a neighboring nation like Nepal. So it was great to get that feedback that this is a worthwhile problem to solve, because they also see a similar sort of challenge. And it's very important and critical, because today these 100+ unicorns that we have in India, they're not just creating these unicorns, the companies, but they're also training this innovation talent, right? So India is actually having the maximum amount of innovation talent, which is born digital. And it's a beautiful perspective to have in India. Mm-hmm. And if we couple that with the technology resources, 11% of all AI talent comes out of India. So if we couple it with that, we could create leapfrog companies which will not just work in India, but could also go to Southeast Asia, Middle East, Africa, even in US and Europe. And we are already seeing that, some of that, perspective. We had one of the companies that we had supported earlier called Vyasa, which was applying, AI to mental health through chatbots. And they're getting not just used in India, but also in US and UK now. Mm-hmm. So we see this whole progression where startups which are creating these disruptive new technology and finding out the use case, they will not just remain in India, but will go global. And because India is a great representation of the kind of problems, we might get, I call it India, we have the supermarket of problems, right, all present in front of us. Mm-hmm. And for AI, the problem data is key, because if you have the problem data, then you can create the solution. So India would become a sort of like the storehouse of solutions, leveraging AI and robotics, not just for itself, but also for the global world. And this G20 delegates provided a great feedback on that.
Mr. Soni, your thoughts on what's really driving the exponential growth? We are looking at a 15,000% rise over 6 years in the number of Indian startups. So particularly in the tech space, what is driving that sort of growth, and what are the constraints that still remain? Because you would have heard Mohandas Pai talk about how G20 should set up a fund of funds for startup of around $10 billion because there are capital constraints, he said.
No, absolutely. I think one of the great initiatives that current government has taken up is this creation of fund of funds. So there were two fund of funds that were created: startup fund of fund and Electronic Development Fund, and I had set up previously a venture fund called Pi Ventures, and we got support under that. And not only us, there were like 100 plus venture funds which got supported under that. And these venture funds in turn supported startups, right? So you see the whole decentralization of funding infrastructure actually has created these assets today which are becoming unicorns. So I think this decentralization of funding infrastructure was a key and I would say a very decisive step in the direction of making India the startup nation in that sense. And I think if we learn from that successful experiment and amplify it, and that's where probably he was talking about $10 billion fund of fund experiment, which G20 can put together. It could be public, private, and more in the same way, which in turn could fund venture funds, and venture funds could fund startups, and these could be about global problems, right? Like today we have a challenge in terms of how do we bring connect the unconnected, right? And we saw interacting with G20 representatives, that whether it is Nepal, whether it is Mexico, whether it is Argentina, the fruits of technology have to reach the last mile. And for that, there is a massive challenge. We have a problem in terms of sustainability and climate change, which everybody has to come together and solve it. So if we can actually have this fund of fund, which basically talks about applying technologies to solve the SDG goals, this could be a massive game changer.
Very quickly, how and by when do you see India becoming the startup destination for the world when it comes to artificial intelligence and robotics through G20 and other ways?
No, I think, and this is where I see India has a huge role to play. I think if the capital comes in, startup ecosystem, it comes together. We have training so many of the innovation talent, and that's where the accelerators and incubators like Art Park are playing a critical role, because we have this massive university ecosystem which is training talent at large scale and creating research. Now, if you build this research translation infrastructure and connect it to the problems that we are all facing across G20, India could be source of a lot of this innovation. And what today people saw would just a glimmer of what is actually possible. I mean, we could amplify it by 1,000 times if we can get enough talent, research, data, and capital along with this problem set.
Thank you, Mr. Soni, for charting, in a sense, a roadmap to India becoming the startup destination in the world, particularly in AI and robotics, a field that you are associated with. India already is the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. Thank you for joining us with your views. Well, let's move on now to substantive pleasure. The substantive meetings of the first development working group concluded in Mumbai on day 2. Here's DD India correspondent Amritpal Singh with the day's roundup from Mumbai.
As the 2-day deliberations of the development working group under India's presidency of G20 concluded here in Mumbai, the consensus that emerged among the member countries, the invitee countries, and the participating international organizations was that collective and decisive action has to be taken by all stakeholders if any meaningful progress has to be made on achieving the sustainable development goals.
In a globalized world where everything is changing, data offer potential for changing the way of approaching development challenges, and that's why data for development, data for SDG, for sustainable development goals is so important, and the India presidency, rightly so, is putting that at the top of their priorities, and G20 I think is a perfect opportunity to discuss these issues with more depth and looking at what we can do.
The delegates committed to putting the collective weight of these countries behind life or the lifestyle for environment movement, women-led development, and effective use of data for development, especially bridging the global digital divide.
Information usually it's it could be delivered in different forms, in digital as well as on paper. So it's important not just to have data, but it should be objective, and there should be some standards for this. And I believe that in our country we could solve this problem, and we are ready to share our experience with other countries as well.
The idea is to ensure that no one is left behind as these countries commit to give a renewed push to sustainable development. With cameraman YK Loknath, this is Amrit Pal Singh for DD India in Mumbai.
And our correspondent Amrit Pal Singh now joins us from Mumbai. Amrit, particularly I thought that data for development and life or lifestyle for environment were two key focus areas today. What has the G20 initiative on data for development proposed to do, and how?
Look, over the 2 days of deliberation, Munmun, basically they focused on sustainable development goals, and because the record of countries on working towards achieving sustainable development goals has been abysmal. Okay.
Abysmal.
Has been bad.
Yes.
So, so there was a bit, yeah, okay. It was, decided that a renewed push needs to be given for that. The new tools that have emerged of data, using data, bridging the global digital divide, creating digital infrastructure, especially in the developing world. That was the key focus of the deliberations when it came to data for development, because data, best practices were put forward by India, that how it used data to reach out to its people. Today, the Jan Dhan accounts, 56% of them women hold. Key policies are being, shaped by data. So the focus was to use the tool of data to further give impetus to achieving the sustainable development goals given the Agenda 2030. So that was the key focus when it came to data, that how development, which has to be inclusive, which has to take everybody along, that nobody is left out, how different tools can be, the modern tools and the emerging tools can be used to achieve that. Munmun.
Amrit, how is India driving consensus on life or lifestyle for environment, and what scale and size would India like this mission to take through G20 and beyond?
What India wishes to do is that use lifestyle for environment movement to sort of merge the achievement of SDG by public participation. Now, life basically says that the citizen takes active part. It's not just left to governments or institutions to bring about to arrest climate change, but by taking small steps at the individual level, reduce the collective carbon footprint. We are 6 billion of us in the world. So if 2/3 of that population lives in these G20 countries, add to that the invitee countries who are part of it, 9 more countries, and you can really start a global movement. The Prime Minister had proposed this idea first at Glasgow COP conference, where he had appealed to the globe to do it. So even if G20 is able to put its collective weight behind the life movement, you can achieve big goals. So I think at this G20, India is trying to use life to convince the G20 countries that this is an idea whose time has come, and these countries need to collectively work towards merging, using life to attain the goals of SDG and arrest climate change, which is of course the biggest problem of our times.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amrit, for joining us with your inputs. And it's time to say goodbye, but before that we'll leave you with the visuals of G20 delegates who explored India's rich and colourful art and crafts. The exhibition outside the meeting venue displayed traditional Indian weaves, handicrafts, paintings, sweets and ornaments from Maharashtra. This is going to be a treat to your eyes. Thanks for watching.
on boys, let's go practice.
अरे रुक यार, मेरे बैंक अकाउंट में गलत एंट्री का प्रॉब्लम हो गया।
अरे तो बैंक को कंप्लेन करना।
बैंक को लिखे 1 महीना हो गया है, बट वो गूगली पे गूगली डाले जा रहे हैं।
तो आरबीआई के लोकपाल को इन्फॉर्म करो।
रुक, मैं समझाता हूँ। जैसे क्रिकेट में थर्ड अंपायर, वैसे ही आरबीआई का ओम्बुड्समैन। आरबीआई कहता है अगर बैंक आपकी कंप्लेंट को 1 महीने में नहीं सुलझाता तो आप आरबीआई के कंप्लेंट मैनेजमेंट सिस्टम पर ऑनलाइन कंप्लेंट कर सकते हैं। ये आरबीआई का आसान तरीका है आपकी कंप्लेंट सुलझाने का, और वो भी फ्री।
आरबीआई कहता है जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of our weekly show airing every Thursday, India Ideas, which is all about science and tech, innovation and entrepreneurship. I'm Gautam Roy. Today we're talking about the country's food and agri-tech startup sector because it has had a stellar performance during the last fiscal, making India the #1 country in Asia Pacific where investments or funding among startups in this category is concerned, higher than even China. We're talking today with representatives of Omnivore, which is a VC firm funding food and agri-tech startups in the country, and 2 of the agri-tech startups it is funded, that's Arya.ag and Resha Mandi, to find out how the sector has achieved this feat and what does the future hold for it.